Hello to anyone who happens to find this video. My name's Robin, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about one of Canada's most notorious crimes, the massacre of the Donnelly family. Before I go into detail about the massacre in 1880, I want to mention that this is a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of back and forth disputes between the Donnelly family and the community of Lucan. By no means were the Donnellys known as a neighborly family, and there's a lot of speculation. The Donnelly family was a part of many community issues. The family was also commonly blamed for things that they rarely had proof to back up claims of. Some of the crimes the Donnelly family was charged for or blamed for include squatting, thievery, abduction, arson, assault, and James Sr., the father of the family, was convicted for the murder of Patrick Farrell in 1858. So they were no saints by any means. They were not necessarily the best of people. The men of the Donnelly family were especially known for being troublemakers. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then there's also the Peace Society, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. They were created in 1879, which was formed of members of the St. Patrick Roman Catholic Church. No Donnelly family was associated with the Peace Society, and from the Peace Society became the Vigilance Community, who I will also talk about a little bit later. The majority of the suspected killers of the Donnelly family were associated with either the Peace Society or the Vigilance Committee, or both. I do want to put a trigger warning here. Trigger warning, my goodness. As I go into detail a little bit more, this is a very gruesome murder. It involves weapons, fire, deaths of people, and, of course, deaths of animals as well. So if that's going to be something that's going to affect you at all, please don't watch this. On the night of February 3rd, 1880, an attack took place in which the Donnelly family was brutally beaten and murdered. This tragic event has come to be known as the Lucan Horror, or more commonly, the Black Donnellys. The date of death of the family members who died in the massacre were all listed as February 4th, as it was shortly before midnight when their homes were invaded, and then the house was set on fire after midnight. It was around 1 a.m., I believe, 1 or 2 a.m., the morning of February 4th. So if anyone had still been alive, they would have passed away, succumbed to the fire. A little bit of context. I want to talk a bit about the family members, just so because I'm going to mention their names later on. So James and Johanna are the parents. They had a son named James Jr. They were an Irish family who immigrated to Canada around 1840. I believe it was 1842, and they made their home in Lucan, Ontario. James and Johanna had 8 children, so they had James Jr. Then they also had William, John, Patrick, Michael, Robert, Thomas, and Jenny. They also have a cousin named Bridget, James's niece, who was staying with them during the time of the massacre. The massacre happened when the children were all grown and most had been moved out. James Jr. had passed away 3 years prior to the massacre. His cause of death is said to be illness, but some people have speculated that he had been murdered. And Michael had been killed a year prior to the massacre in a pub fight. William, John, Patrick, Robert, and Jenny were not present at the Donnelly homestead at the time of the massacre. However, William lived nearby, which is where he and his brother John were at the time. Robert, Jenny, and Patrick were the only family members not around. They were not living in Lucan at this time. James, Johanna, Thomas, Bridget, their dog, and a local farm boy named Johnny, who helped out with their chores, were all present at the Donnelly homestead the night of February 3rd. Now to get to the actual massacre. On February 4th, 1880, James and Johanna were to appear in court as they were accused of burning down a neighbor's barn in January. However, there was either no proof that they did it, or they didn't actually do it. That is possible. Everyone was well aware that because of this, they were most likely not going to face any charges, because there wasn't anything to back up that they did it. Sorry, I'm reading off my laptop because I didn't want to miss anything. The evening of February 3rd, the outraged Vigilance Committee gathered together at the Cedar Swamp Schoolhouse and constructed their plan of attack on the Donnelly family. They had planned to restrain and beat, then hang the Donnelly men with the intent of having them confess to their crimes. It was a messy plan at best. The committee, drunk and enraged, made their way to the Donnelly homestead with guns, handcuffs, clubs, an axe, a shovel, and a pitchfork. The committee broke into the Donnelly house and attacked Thomas Donnelly first. They handcuffed him before he had even awakened. A terrified Bridget ran and hid, while Johnny O'Connor, the farm boy who had stayed the night there, hid under Johanna's bed. Johanna fled to her husband James, while the committee discovered that their son John Donnelly was not home. At that point, the committee began to attack James Donnelly, which allowed Johanna and Thomas to also run and hide. James had his skull bludgeoned by the committee. Johanna was the next to be attacked. She fought hard, but she too was beaten within an inch of her life. Thomas tried to fight as well, and he briefly did manage to escape and get out, only to have another committee member greet him with a pitchfork, and he was penetrated multiple times. Bridget was found next and horrifically beaten as well. And during the commotion, the Donnelly's dog had also been present, and the dog, trying to defend itself and barking, was also bludgeoned to the head. The house was then set ablaze, presumably to cover the murder, and it had been snowing that night, so then the house was then covered in snow. The committee had been unaware of the farm boy Johnny, who had stayed over, and Johnny had remained hidden during the attack, and he safely escaped the house after the committee left, and he ran to a neighbor's house immediately to notify them what had happened. The committee made their way down the street to William Donnelly's house, and with the intent to attack him next. Rather than storming the house, the way they had with the main Donnelly home, they gruesomely abused William's horse to lure William outside. Tragically, the horse's wails in the barn went unnoticed from the house. The men then decided to yell for Will to have him come outside. Some say that the men yelled fire to get Will's attention. Not entirely sure. Either way, Will actually is not the one who went to the door that night. His brother John had been staying with him, and John is the one that answered the door, and he was greeted with 30 gunshots upon answering the door. His limp body then fell to the ground, in which another committee member decided that he was going to punish him with an additional 7 gunshots. William and his wife had remained hidden inside, along with a friend of theirs that was there, and William was able to get a glimpse of some of the men that were present and who horrendously murdered his brother. For whatever reason, the committee opted to not go in the house, but they simply surveyed the property, and then they eventually returned to their own homes, leaving William unharmed. The murders went to trial. However, Johnny, along with other witnesses, were credited as an unreliable source. Unfortunately, no one was convicted of the Donnelly Massacre, as it was said to have had a lack of credible evidence. Poor Johnny and his family did endure harassment during those times, including having their house burnt down. James Freeheley confessed to his involvement in the massacre and was arrested. He was bailed out by the Peace Society, and the charges were dropped. Considering the amount of people that hated the Donnelly family, and the amount of families that were involved with the massacre, there is a lot of speculation that the reason the trial had ended was to avoid backlash of what would have happened should someone have been convicted of the crimes. To this day, the Donnelly Massacre is unsolved. After the trials, William Donnelly went to be constable in Glencoe, Ontario. Jenny Donnelly lived with her husband, also in Glencoe, Ontario. Patrick Donnelly was a wagon maker in Thorold, Ontario, and Robert Donnelly was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in London, Ontario. The family was laid to rest in the St. Patrick's Cemetery in Lucan, Ontario. The original tombstone has been replaced, as it did say murdered underneath the victims' names, and it was a large target for vandalism. A new headstone has been put in its place, and people do often leave trinkets or money on the tomb. Legend has it that if you leave a coin on the Donnelly tombstone and make a wish, the Donnellys will grant that wish. Also, if you ever owed someone money before they died, if you place the money on the tombstone before midnight, the ghost will collect it. As you can probably imagine, this is a site where people have encountered paranormal experiences. A well-known legend is that there's a lady who can be seen riding along the road the Donnelly's house was on the night of February 4th. Some people claim to have seen Donnelly family members at the original property, where the house used to stand and where their barn used to stand. Another claim is that horses won't go past the original homestead property past midnight. A new house and barn have been built on the property that the Donnelly homestead did stand on. The property did not stay in the Donnelly family, to my knowledge. They did not build the new house or the new barn where the original house and barn stood. I have been to that property myself. I was briefly in the current house that is there, and I was briefly in the current barn that is there, as well as I went to the property of the Cedar Swamp Schoolhouse, and I did visit the grave of the Donnelly family. I didn't have any real out-of-ordinary experiences at all. I was there in the summer and during the day. as opposed to in February at night. Lucan there is a Lucan area heritage and Donnelly museum that does have a recreation of the Donnelly house, a recreation of their carriage, a recreation of the original tombstone, as well as much more information about the family and the massacre, as well as pictures of the family members. This is a very condensed version of everything that led up to the massacre, so please feel free to look into the event further if you would like to know more. There are multiple books, websites for additional information. I believe there's also a movie made. Perhaps it was a documentary, I'm not entirely sure. Like I said, so they had moved to Canada in, I believe, like I said, 1842, and this event happened in 1880, so there was about a 40-year period where there was a lot of back and forth with the Donnelly family and the community. A lot of stuff has happened, so I would recommend looking into a timeline. I believe Wikipedia has a breakdown of the timeline on it. There's a few other websites that do have timeline breakdowns as well, because it kind of gives you more of an idea as what happened. Of course, it is not justifiable in any means, and it really sucks that no one was actually convicted. Multiple men did go to did get arrested, but they were all let out. No one was convicted. There's a lot of speculation about the members that were involved. I will put their names down below. But again, it was a lot of families were involved, so it was a very unspoken about thing, and from my knowledge, the Lucan area sort of erased this from history. It wasn't a commonly talked about thing for a long time because of the families and the ancestors that came from the families. It is obviously a lot more popular now. They have made essentially a tourist site from it. Like the man that lives on the property now, he was the one that allowed us to go there and visit. It was like a paid for, organized thing. I'm not sure if he still does it. I'm not even sure where to look into that anymore. But I did want to put this out there. It is a really interesting thing. That it is one of the biggest unsolved crimes that happened in Canada. It's one of the most notorious things. Yeah, it was very sad. It was very tragic, and I just thought it would be interesting to share. I know there are lots of other videos and that about this, but it's interesting. Not everyone talks about the paranormal aspect of things as well. So if you are someone that's into ghost hunting or paranormal, anything like that, it is interesting to visit. So thank you for watching. I hope you found this a little bit interesting. Sorry, I know I ramble a lot. Thanks.